For many who are geographically distant from these lands, understanding the disparities between Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, as well as their historical emergence, can be ambiguous. Having undergone periods of separation, temporary amalgamation, and subsequent division, the Czech and Slovak communities persist as sibling Slavic nations, bound by strong affinities and akin cultural heritages. However, if such is the scenario, then what transpired precisely? What led to the dissolution of Czechoslovakia? Czechoslovakia came into being in 1918 as the Austro-Hungarian Empire approached its end, with several of its territories opting to unite due to their strikingly similar cultures, languages, and populations. The union of Bohemia, Moravia, and Slovakia gave rise to this new state, which initially showed signs of amicable relations. Under President Masaryk, Czechoslovakia embraced a system of parliamentary democracy, swiftly emerging as one of the more stable and industrially advanced nations in Eastern Europe. However, this stability would face a significant challenge just before the outbreak of the Second World War. As the German leader embarked on his expansionist campaign across Europe in the late 1930s, the territories of Bohemia and Moravia succumbed to German control. In a matter of years, Slovakia too would come under German occupation. However, this era of turmoil would be short-lived, as the Soviet Union dispatched troops to liberate Czechoslovakia during World War II. Soviet intervention swiftly propelled the Communist Party to prominence within Czechoslovakia, culminating in a 1948 coup d'etat that established the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic under communist rule, marking the party's takeover of the nation. This period in Czechoslovakia's history would unfortunately be marked by ongoing troubles. One of the most prominent challenges faced by the emerging socialist republic occurred in the 1960s and became famously known as the Prague Spring. During this period, there emerged a sense of promise for reform, albeit not overly radical. However, when the reform-minded Alexander Dubček assumed leadership, his objective was to establish what he termed communism with a human face, initiating a series of political and economic reforms, among which the heightened freedom of speech stood out as particularly significant. While this pleased numerous citizens of Czechoslovakia, it elicited a markedly contrasting reaction from the neighboring Soviet Union. The Prague Spring abruptly concluded on August 20th, 1968, with the invasion of Czechoslovakia by 600,000 troops from the Warsaw Pact, spearheaded by the Soviet Union. Dubček was ousted from power in the aftermath of the invasion, and under his pro-Soviet successor, Gustav Husak, the progressive reforms were promptly revoked. The subsequent decades saw the Czechoslovak Republic under the grip of a repressive communist regime, a situation akin to a ticking time bomb. As communism faced mounting challenges across Eastern Europe and the Berlin Wall crumbled, citizens of Czechoslovakia grew restless once again. November witnessed renewed calls for demonstrations. Yet under the oppressive dictatorship they endured, activists found themselves technically unable to organize such protests. However, the communist government consented to authorize a demonstration on November 17, 1989, to commemorate a student who had been murdered 50 years earlier by the occupying Nazi forces. Arranged partially by the Socialist Youth Union, the event was intended to steer clear of the city center and solely commemorate the memory of the slain student. However, events did not unfold as planned. Instead, as additional citizens joined the protest after learning of its occurrence or seeing it on television, the demonstration began to evolve from an anti-Nazi movement into one that also opposed communism. While the police initially permitted the initial phase of the demonstration to proceed without interference, the situation took a drastic turn as the crowd made its way toward Wenceslas Square. Banners proclaiming "Stop beating students" and "Freedom" provided a vivid visual backdrop alongside the chants of "Dialogue" and "We don't want the Communist Party, 40 years are enough" that provoked the police response. Out of the 50,000 individuals in attendance at the demonstration, It's reported that approximately 100 were detained and numerous others sustained injuries, with over a dozen requiring hospitalization due to beatings inflicted by police wielding batons and accompanied by K-9 units. By this juncture, numerous demonstrators commenced fleeing the scene, while others were compelled to do so. Moreover, there was a widespread belief that a rumor regarding a student martyr had been disseminated, although many suspected that this was concocted by a police officer posing as a student and feigning his own demise to exacerbate tensions. Whatever the actual sequence of events, it's clear that any intentions of bolstering the populace to persist in standing up against the dictatorship were undeniably effective. The events of November 17th marked the inception of the Velvet Revolution. In response, opponents of the existing one-party government found themselves emboldened and revitalized. The forceful reactions from the police proved ineffective in dissuading further demonstrations. Instead, the protests continued to gain momentum. Just 3 days later, 500,000 demonstrators gathered at Wenceslas Square to denounce the communist dictatorship. Renowned dissident and theater luminary Václav Havel also played a pivotal role in the revolution and is credited with orchestrating one of its most symbolic displays of unity, the mass jingling of keys. Over the subsequent week, the underground press flourished alongside escalating public protests. However, as described by British author Timothy Garton Ash, the overall movement was characterized as swift, entirely non-violent, joyful, and humorous. By November 28th, the Czechoslovak government acknowledged its inevitable outcome. There was no intervention from the Warsaw Pact to rescue communism this time, and the people of Czechoslovakia had simply reached their limit. The incumbent regime stepped aside in favor of a revitalized multi-party system, with Václav Havel elected as the new and final president of Czechoslovakia. The subsequent elections in the summer of 1990 witnessed the communists enduring a resounding defeat, cementing the establishment of the new anti-communist government. However, this also heralded the onset of the era now referred to as the Velvet Divorce. Just as the process of democratization had commenced, Czechoslovakia found itself abruptly confronted with a rekindled tension from the past, the division between Czechs and Slovaks. The discord, while peaceful, was nonetheless significant, as both sides held divergent views on how to proceed following the era of communism, exacerbated by the prolonged drift between the populations. This ultimately led to the non-violent separation of Czechoslovakia into two distinct entities, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Interestingly, according to opinion polls conducted at the time, it appears that the division between the Slovak and Czech people was primarily concentrated within the ruling elite, with less polarization among the average citizens, who often expressed a preference for a unified nation. Nonetheless, nationalist sentiments were present on both sides, and the desired reforms of each side did not precisely align with each other. On January 1, 1993, the official dissolution took place. In summary, Czechoslovakia split up primarily due to escalating tensions between Czechs and Slovaks, exacerbated by differing views on post-communist reforms. The final straws were the inability to reconcile these differences, leading to a peaceful separation into the Czech Republic and Slovakia on January 1, 1993. To begin with, Czechoslovakia was a relatively young nation, and its unity was not historically ingrained. The Czech and Slovak people, while sharing similarities, also had distinct identities. They possessed distinct cultures, languages, and political perspectives, despite the assertion by proponents of Czechoslovakia's creation that these ethnic and cultural identities were uniquely intertwined. Moreover, the Czechs held numerical superiority and wielded greater influence within the Union, but they were seen as the lesser of two evils by the Slovaks. This was because, as fellow Slavs, the Czechs stood against Slovakia's potential absorption into Hungary. The Czechs also sought a partnership with a Slavic neighbor to counterbalance the sizable ethnic German population within Czech borders. However, after the deportations of Germans following the Second World War, this necessity largely disappeared. Furthermore, following the collapse of the communist government, Czechoslovakia faced a period of transition and a pressing need for reforms. As mentioned earlier, these reforms posed challenges because the Czech and Slovak people, as well as their respective governments, couldn't reach a consensus on how to navigate the transition to their new democratic administrations. These disagreements were not novel. Rather, after the Velvet Revolution, it marked the first occasion when such discord could even be openly expressed. Now, with the threat of Germanization or Hungarianization eliminated, there was no longer any reason for these disagreements not to be addressed and acted upon. Hence, although no referendum was conducted to ascertain whether the people themselves were truly in favor of the split or not, the governments of both Czechoslovakia's halves resolved to dissolve Czechoslovakia.